It's 2026 now, and I wanted to take a little bit of time to look back over how 2025 went from a positive growth writing mindset because I've learned a lot. If you don't know me, my name is CF Claire and I write romance novels. I'm going to roll some clips though of my vlogs from the last year and do a voiceover for the top 10 things that I learned about writing craft or writing process related to writing process. And this is not 10 things to make you a better writer. It's not a list like that. It's 10 things that I learned this year that helped me with my own writing. So definitely leave a comment below if you have anything in particular that you learned this year that you're really excited about that's helping you a lot, because I would love to hear about it. I'm going to put some timestamps in the description and there'll be a lot of resources for these things that I'm about to talk about. So let's jump into it. Number 1, 8-sequence outlining exists and it's fantastic. I believe this is originally a screenwriting technique, but it works really well for novels too. It's a method of organizing an outline just like the 3-act structure is, but the difference is in the formatting of it. So instead of thinking about your book as one big book, you can break it down into 8 mini books that tell the larger story, but each sequence has a beginning, middle, and climax. You have really natural rising and falling tension that progressively ramps up into the main climax of the book. And the sequences aren't random, they align so that the climax of each sequence is a larger story beat playing out. Each sequence is roughly 12.5% of the book, or an eighth. So your first sequence's climax is the inciting event of the book playing out by that 12.5% mark. And the climax of the second sequence is your door of no return or break into two or whatever you want to call it playing out at that 25% mark. And so on. I won't get more in depth than that. That would be like its own video. But as someone who really benefits from substantial outlining, this has been such a huge game changer for me, because once I figure out what my protagonist's goal is in the story, it's so much easier to fill in those climax spots for the 8 sequences and then to fill in what needs to happen in between them to get us there. And I really love how it breaks a big thing like a book into much more manageable bite-sized pieces to work with. Number 2, you can actually use the protagonist's goal to plot the book. It's both so simple and such a revelation. Maybe everyone out there is just doing this on their own and I had to figure it out this year after it not occurring to me. I don't know. But what I mean is, like, if you break down the progress markers that the character needs to hit before they can achieve their goal, like, that's their plan of what they're gonna do, right? I don't know. So if anyone else is out there and is like, what are you talking about? I've never considered this before. You're not alone, first of all. And so I wanted to just like have a quick little illustrative example, because I just truly don't understand why I didn't think of this before. My little example is, let's say that boy wants treasure. What kind of progress markers might there be if that's the goal? And we're going to put their need right there in the sentence, because they're going to have to choose between what they want and what they need in that climactic moment. So it's just nice and simple if we include it. And we're going to use their need as defined by John Truby in Anatomy of Story as something missing within them that is so profound it is ruining their life. The need is what they must fulfill within themselves in order to have a better life. So boy wants money but needs friendship. The progress markers might be something like boy decides to find legendary treasure. Boy finds a crew so he can travel to get the treasure. They leave to journey towards where they think the treasure is. They get to the treasure island. They find the treasure. There would be a climactic moment where the boy has to decide between what he wants and what he needs. So in this example, the crew would have become his friends. So he would have to choose between getting the treasure but losing his friends, or losing the treasure but keeping his friends. He would make his climactic choice. He's going to choose friendship over the treasure. So Boy loses treasure but gains the real treasure of friendship. Boy lives happily ever after with his friends. Obviously, this is a very simple outline that's only goal based, so we don't see anything that the primary opponent is doing or any other story threads. I'm sure you could pick different progress markers, but I feel like even just from those couple sentences, it's like, there's the shape of the book, right? Like, that's what's going on. I cannot overstate how big this was for me. I'm looking forward to knowing this now, for sure. Number 3, story structure and story components are different things. So all of these on some level seem so simple looking back, but really I didn't fully grasp any of these until this year. So one of the biggest revelations of the year, and there was a lot, but one of the biggest ones was when I had this aha moment and realized that I never really knew what to do with the bad guys in my stories, the primary opponent, and so I just didn't do much. One story in particular comes to mind, and that flaw of the primary opponent really not doing anything, combined with the protagonist of that story having a goal that was too abstract and not clearly, definitively obtainable, made the story have about zero momentum right out of the gate, and it never gained any. And I feel like it's these things that are not actually structural, but show up and affect the structure. They're hidden problems. I had no idea what was going on, but I knew that the entire structure of the story was weak, and I didn't know what to do about that. And it was caused by my story components being weak. I had no idea who this antagonist was, why they wanted to stop my protagonist, and actually, they didn't even specifically want to stop my protagonist. No one wanted to stop my protagonist. Everyone was just doing their own vague evil agenda while my protagonist was trying to find out who she was. It's very easy to be pretty hard on yourself when you look back at this stuff and you're like, how did I think that that would fly? But, we just don't know what we don't know at the time, right? I spent so long trying to write that story, and it was so hard. And I had no idea what was going on. By the way, if this is feeling familiar to you and you think you have possibly some of these problems going on, I so highly recommend John Truby's The Anatomy of Story. I think he gives a really good grasp of story components. I had never heard a lot of things described the way that he described them that really helped things click for me. Number 4, and this is related, but we're gonna get a little more specific here. If a protagonist's desire can't carry the story, then there is no story. And this, I feel like, is one of the things that you literally hear maybe the most. You hear all the time, and it's like, obviously, the protagonist has to want their goal. And yet, here I am, right? So this is related to a different project. Sometimes you have those projects that are just like guinea pigs for every mistake you have ever made as a writer. And this is this is related to my contemporary shifter romance that I was working on at the beginning of this year, Project Chance, which went through 6 different iterations or something over the course of like 10 years. I don't even know. But the most recent version is what I was working with at the beginning of this year, and I thought that I had given my protagonist a really good goal. I had restructured a lot of things, and I thought it was going to work well. I feel like it's one thing to come up with a goal for your protagonist and be like, this is objectively a great, solid goal, right? And yet, sometimes it doesn't seem like it's a goal that's solid for the protagonist you choose. I don't know why that is. My protagonists always come before anything else. I don't have an idea of a story, and then I'm like, and what kind of protagonist would it be? I'm always like, here's this idea for a character. Now let's write a story about them. So that may be part of the problem. And it was only when I switched over to start working on my middle grade fantasy closer to the summer of last year, Project Conjurer, that I finally had a protagonist with a clear, strong desire that he was committed to 100% no matter what it took. even if it meant him facing his greatest fear, and that I had a primary opponent who also wanted to stop him from achieving that goal just as much. Literally up until, what, 6 months ago, I had never had that in a story. I've written so many stories. Like, it's ridiculous. But if you know, you know the difference between a protagonist with a strong desire line and one with a very weak or passive one is like night and day. It's pulling teeth to get anywhere, or the story almost writing itself. And I had really only written dual point of view romances since basically forever. So Project Conjure was the first project ever to feel like, oh my gosh, this is what it's supposed to feel like. Because he wants the goal so bad. So of course he's going to be doing all this stuff. The hero's this 12-year-old boy who wants to find his missing father before he and his brother get separated by this very creepy orphanage thing going on. So he, like, has a very clear goal. He needs to find his father, or else terrible thing that's gonna be awful. So he's gonna do whatever it takes. And I don't know why it was so hard to figure that out. But it's very exciting now because I'm like, okay, we're locked in. We need to make sure that these characters want what I say they want. Number 5. This is specific to romance novels. Most of the time in romance novels, the scene level opponent is the love interest. I got really into scene structure this last year and the difference between the primary story opponent and scene level opponents, and how do you write a scene correctly. So it was such a fun revelation though when I was like, oh yeah, romances are built around the two main characters being on page together as much as possible, and you need them to have that push-pull dynamic for it to be engaging. So it just makes sense that a lot of the times whatever the protagonist wants is going to be in opposition to whatever the love interest wants. There it is. And that has helped with focusing my scenes a little bit better. Number 6. The story does not exist in a vacuum. It exists in a genre. I feel like 2025 was the year that I really embraced genre and actually did a little bit of research into it. I don't think I had spent hardly any time thinking about it before this past year, because I always knew I was going to be writing romance, and it was pretty clear whether I'd be writing contemporary romance or paranormal romance, so I didn't think I had to think about it that much. But I've been doing a lot more research into being an author, like a self-published author. And so I've been listening to a lot of people who are self-published authors talk about marketing and positioning. And, you know, it's all very smart because from a marketing and positioning standpoint, it makes sense to know very specifically what genre and subgenre your book is going to be in so you can market it and position it that way. But it's also just as important from a writing perspective because genres come with expectations and subgenres come with their own expectations. So readers like those expectations and they get upset if you don't deliver on those expectations. I really like what Maria from All Right Well says about those expectations helping to ground readers in what they expect so that they can enjoy the things about your story that set it apart. And she talks about how about 80% of your story should fit reader expectations for the genre you market your book as, and about 20% should be your twist on things. And I think that's really smart because there's not an infinite amount of ways to tell the story when you consider genre. There's a shape that you can use. And I'm trying to keep that in mind. I say all of this as if I have no issues with genre anymore when that is not the case. I am trying to figure out where my series that I'm working on right now fits within the subgenres of romance. There's more research that I need to do into what genre I want to label my stuff as, but it's definitely something to keep in mind. Number 7. Even tropes have beats. So I've usually been somewhat aware of the tropes that I wanted to use in books, but I never really gave them very much thought, and I definitely never plotted out the beats that you would expect from those tropes. But I did start doing that in the fall of 2025 when I was outlining Project Goblin, because I was like, I need to write what I love, but I need to marry that to what's marketable because I know it can be marketable if I design it with some forethought. And everything started coming together so much easier than it had when I started breaking down those beats within the tropes I wanted. So, for instance, Project Goblin is centered on this enemies to lovers trope. So, when I was sitting down to try to break down my own expectations for that trope, I came up with some things like, instead of a meet cute, having a meet hate, that they need to become reluctant allies through a common goal. There needs to be some sort of grudging respect, inconvenient attraction. There needs to be some sort of revelation that recalibrates one of their opinions about the other person, unexpected romantic feelings. You know, like, I'm not going to go through all of them, but there need to be these steps, otherwise it's hard to buy. And I really loved that because that helped figure out exactly what kind of scenes I wanted to have in the book and to kind of focus them on making sure that the book's fun and engaging, but also is delivering on that full spectrum of here's how they get from enemies to lovers, you know. Number 8, using the midpoint as the character arc pivot point. So I read Next Level Plot Structure by K.M. Weiland, which I really, really liked. And one of the things I loved most about it was her idea that at the midpoint, there's some sort of plot revelation that enlightens the protagonist as to why their efforts so far to achieve their goal haven't been working. And that plot revelation causes the protagonist to experience a mirror moment, which she calls a moment of truth, where the protagonist realizes whatever the essential truth of the story is and sees their lie as a lie. And then after that point, their character arc in the second half of the book is them struggling to let go of that lie and to embrace that larger truth. And it was that distinction, though, between cause and effect that really helped that concept sink in. That plot revelation causes that moment of truth. And that was so helpful because usually I know what I want that moment of truth, character arc revelation to be in my stories. And then you can just ask yourself, okay, what would it take for them to have this revelation? I love that. I really had never thought of it like that before. Okay, and then these last two are more kind of personal writing process takeaways of the year. Number 9, use fast drafting to build momentum and finish a first draft. So believe it or not, I'm a recovering perfectionist when it comes to writing. That may be hard to to believe. But in my early vlogs from 2025, I'm still pushing through the difficulty of writing badly in order to write a full first draft to the end. I had only written a first draft to the end once back in 2024. And with that project, the last quarter of the book was like 5,000 words total. It was something crazy, but I did finish it. It's hard to write badly. It's really, really hard to give yourself permission to just get words on the page. I honestly think that until you reach a certain writing skill level, writing badly is harder than writing well. Maybe that's controversial. I don't know. But you can edit a sentence, a paragraph, a chapter so many times. You can make it sound so good. But if you don't know how to finish your story, you have nothing. It's so painful. It's so painful. We've all been there, right? Beautiful first chapter. No idea what happens next. This year I discovered fast drafting. And when I say fast drafting, I mean writing as bare bones as you need to, as absolutely ugly as you need to, as fast as you can, without burning yourself out, so that you can see what your story is and decide how you can make it better. Momentum is no joke. I first tried fast drafting with my second draft of Project Chance, somewhere like late spring, which it was almost entirely a rewrite. And that took about 5 or 6 weeks to fast draft it. Not writing on the weekends, but writing basically 5 days a week. I think it was about 50,000 words, something like that. And I did it as an experiment because the first draft of that project that I did back in like January to March or so, I'd gotten really stuck on certain parts and the process just felt really miserable and long. And I was doing a rewrite anyway, so I was like, I may as well see if I can get through it fast. And I did not expect it to go well. I did not think I would like it when I reread it because I wrote it as literally as fast as I could. And I'll link the playlist in the description, but I started a segment called Rate My Chapter, where I read each chapter off camera, gave a little bit of context about what was going on with the writing of each chapter, and then I gave each chapter a star rating out of 5. Not based on the prose, how good the prose was, but about whether I thought that I had gotten what I wanted to get onto the page. And I was really blown away that I really liked so many of the chapters. Even ones that I'd felt really blah while I was writing them, I read them over and I was like, yeah, I mean, the prose is straight up bad, but I see what I was doing with this, and it needed to happen, and I like the way I set it up, so I think I can revise it into something good. So that's a win. If you've never tried fast drafting, it's something to consider. I really liked it. Okay, and this last one is possibly controversial. I also definitely don't just recommend it for anyone to try. But for me, I have been really loving it. Number 10 is write multiple drafts of an outline before actually drafting. And there's a lot of dangers that can come with something like this. There's a lot of danger. So there is a certain amount of self-awareness that you would need to have if you were going to try something like this. Because obviously there's the danger of like getting too deep into outlining that you lose interest and you never write it, or you just get lost in outline after outline. But for someone like me who really likes detailed outlines, and I know the character arc I want my characters to go on. I really like working with story structure and beats and genre and tropes and theme. I love having the story worked out before writing the prose. I love doing all the thinking time first and writing second. I love starting with my favorite things about the idea, brainstorming out how to tie together the missing pieces, and keeping it vague at first, keeping the possibilities open, but finishing the outline, and every chapter, whatever it is that progresses the plot, having that written down. Then I love taking a break from the project for a few weeks and coming back to it and seeing what I want to change, erasing whole plot lines, changing whole backstories, inserting new secrets and motives, doing it all over again every chapter. What happens to progress the plot? Taking another break, coming back to it again. Now I've thought through the whole story multiple times. I've sat with the characters, the themes, the motives, the plot for a few months at this point, probably. Then going through and fleshing out each scene. Instead of just a brief summary, how does the scene begin? How does it turn? How does it end? As someone who gets most of my motivation to write from themes and character arcs that I really connect to and I'm excited about, this process has been working really, really well for me. I did it with Project Goblin, which I just finished a really detailed zero draft of back in the beginning of January 2026. And I'm doing it for the other books in that series. And it's so fun. And it works so good for me. I have another video that I'll link in the description where I talk about using archetypes to define our relationships with our writing, and how this whole year I've been thinking about myself as a sculptor who didn't know what tools I needed in order to sculpt. I know the high concept stuff I'm trying to achieve. I can verbalize it and be like, I want this middle grade fantasy novel to answer the question, is it better to protect the ones you love or to teach them how to protect themselves? And I want it to be this massive celebration of children and friendship and justice and being an older sibling and the innocence of children and how powerful that innocence is and how it can change the world and inspire older generations who've grown jaded to remember their ideals that they had in their own youth, and all this very high concept stuff that's like, yes, that's what I want. I want to eat that up. I want to write that. I want to eat it up. But obviously knowing this high concept stuff you want to write and knowing how to write it, two very different things. So that's where the multiple drafts of outlining has been so good for me. I feel like that's one of the major tools that I had not learned at the beginning of the year. Doing these drafts of the outline is sculpting the stories down. So that's fantastic for me. We love to see it. Those are my 10 things I learned in 2025 about writing. Thank you so much for hanging out. Again, definitely let me know, what did you learn about your own writing this year? What are you excited to bring into the next year of writing? I'd love to hear about it. I hope you're doing well and that your writing is going well, and I will see you in the next video.